Scientists, they might be hiding something incredible beneath them.
The Euphrates River is turning to dust, and as its waters disappear, something ancient may be awakening beneath the ground. Newly exposed chambers, carved tunnels, and strange shadows have revived a frightening question. Have the four fallen angels described in Revelation finally been discovered? Locals speak of chilling screams from the dry riverbed, glowing figures moving across the water, and a mysterious 7-minute darkness that covered the sun even though no eclipse was recorded. Scripture warns that when the Euphrates dries up, restraints connected to judgment will be released. If these reports are true, could the return of Jesus be closer than many realize? Before we continue, like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more updates like this. The discovery began with a narrow fissure in the earth, revealing a cavern that appeared to have remained sealed for millennia. As researchers descended, they quickly realized this was no ordinary cave. The entrance walls were covered with precise geometric symbols, spirals, and unfamiliar inscriptions. Some markings reportedly reacted faintly to touch, suggesting that whatever lay deeper inside had been created with deliberate purpose. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast chamber containing 4 enormous cell-like structures carved directly into solid rock. Their smooth walls, perfect angles, and narrow entrances seemed far too precise for the ancient world. Yet the interiors were large enough to confine something far greater than a human being. Then the team noticed the restraints. Heavy black chains hung from the walls, several partially fused into the stone, as though exposed to extraordinary heat. Others reached the floor, ending in broken clamps of immense size. Around them, deeply carved symbols formed repeating patterns, resembling restraints, bound figures, and strange geometric sequences unlike any known writing system. The atmosphere only deepened the mystery. Cold air surrounded the researchers while thermal instruments detected rhythmic pulses of heat from the center of each chamber. The pattern rose and faded slowly, almost like a heartbeat. One investigator compared the site to ancient accounts of binding places, created to restrain powerful celestial beings. Another refused to enter the final chamber, saying she felt an unmistakable presence watching from the darkness. By then, one possibility could no longer be ignored. These chambers were never designed as tombs. They were prisons, built deliberately, reinforced with massive restraints, and intended to hold something extraordinarily powerful. And deeper within the cavern stood something that seemed less like a relic and more like a warning left behind. At the entrance to the next passage, researchers discovered a solitary kneeling figure positioned directly toward the 4 massive chambers. From a distance, it appeared to be an ancient statue, but the closer the team moved, the more difficult it became to explain. The figure bowed its head, while both arms reached upward, not peacefully, but with visible strain carved into every muscle. Its hands were open, almost as if begging, surrendering, or trying to hold back something unseen. Even the stone robes seemed unnaturally lifelike, folded with such precision that they appeared frozen in motion. Then one researcher placed his hand against its shoulder. He immediately pulled away. The surface was warm. Not sun-warmed stone, but a steady heat that seemed to come from within. Tests only deepened the mystery. The material looked like limestone, yet responded more like an unknown metallic compound. No one could explain how it had been created, or how long it had been standing there. But the eyes disturbed them most. The sockets were completely hollow, yet faint points of light seemed to shimmer somewhere inside. As team members moved around the statue, several reported the same sensation. Although the head never moved, Its empty gaze seemed to remain fixed on them. Around its base ran a spiral of unfamiliar symbols. Some resembled markings already found inside the cavern, while others appeared older and far more complex. After repeated analysis, one phrase seemed to emerge again and again. "The Watchers await the appointed hour." That changed the meaning of everything. Was the kneeling figure worshipping whatever had been imprisoned there? Was it pleading for the chambers to remain sealed? Or had it been placed as a final warning to anyone foolish enough to continue? Because one detail was now impossible to ignore. The statue was not facing the entrance. It was facing deeper into the darkness. And beyond it, the passage continued. Stay with us, because what the team discovered after passing that kneeling figure made the chains, the chambers, and even the warning itself seem like only the beginning. Long before the cavern was opened, the people living along the Euphrates had already begun avoiding the river after dark. At first, there was no obvious reason. A faint scraping beneath the water, soft murmurs carried by the wind, occasional vibrations under the ground. Most residents blamed animals, shifting soil, or the ordinary sounds of an old river valley settling at night. Then the screaming began. Shortly after sunset, distant cries started rising from somewhere beyond the riverbank. They did not resemble any known animal. Some were sharp and metallic, while others were deep, distorted, and almost human. Stranger still, several voices seemed to overlap at once, as though the sound were traveling upward through different layers of earth. Night after night, the pattern grew stronger, and at exactly 3:33 a.m., everything changed. Recordings showed the screams suddenly intensifying, followed by frequencies too low to hear clearly, but powerful enough to vibrate windows and doors. Dogs refused to approach the shoreline. Horses became restless hours beforehand. Goats would simply stop moving and stare toward the darkness, as though sensing something humans could not. Soon, the ground began responding as well. Cups rattled on tables. Wooden doors trembled in their frames. Beneath people's feet came a slow, repeating pulse, not like an earthquake, but something deeper, heavier, almost rhythmic. Then, between the screams, came the whispers. Barely audible at first, fragments of voices drifted across the water, overlapping from different directions. Some residents claimed they heard words. Others insisted the voices whispered their names. That was when families began leaving. Investigators later placed recording equipment along the river, but batteries drained without warning, microphones failed, and entire audio files returned, filled with the same strange static detected inside the underground chambers. By then, the question was no longer whether something unusual was happening. It was whether the sounds were coming from beneath the earth at all, because each night they seemed louder, closer, and whatever was producing them no longer sounded trapped. It sounded as though it was beginning to wake. Not long after the screams began, the mystery along the Euphrates changed again. Residents started reporting pale figures appearing across the river after midnight, tall, human-like silhouettes emerging through the mist and moving silently above the water. At first, witnesses assumed they were people walking along the opposite bank. But something was wrong. The figures never seemed to take a step. They glided. Even when they crossed shallow sections of the river, there were no splashes, no footprints in the mud, and no disturbance in the water beneath them. Some appeared only as faint white outlines, while others seemed to radiate a dim glow that reflected across the river like trembling moonlight. Then photographs began capturing details witnesses had not noticed. Around several silhouettes were faint extensions resembling wings, transparent, incomplete shapes that appeared for only a fraction of a second before disappearing into the darkness. That was when the sightings became impossible to dismiss as ordinary movement. Some believed the figures might resemble the radiant messengers described throughout Scripture. Others were far less certain. Biblical encounters with angels were not always peaceful. Many began with overwhelming fear, sudden appearances, and commands that left witnesses trembling. But one report changed the entire discussion. A fisherman claimed he watched 3 glowing figures move across the river in perfect synchronization. They stopped at exactly the same moment. Then all 3 turned their heads toward the ground, toward the location of the cavern. They remained motionless for several seconds, as if listening, and then they vanished. After that night, reports multiplied. Were these figures guardians watching over something still imprisoned below? Messengers appearing before an appointed event? Or were they connected to whatever had begun stirring beneath the ancient chambers? No one could answer with certainty. But the timing was impossible to ignore, and every new sign seemed to point toward the same place beneath the earth. Stay with us to uncover what happened next. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe as we go deeper into the mystery. Several miles from the original cavern, another discovery emerged. This time inside a completely different cave, exposed by a recent collapse along the rocky riverbank. Unlike the sealed chambers found earlier, this cavern was partially open to the sky. Sunlight entered through a massive break in the ceiling, illuminating broken stone, drifting dust, and walls that appeared untouched for generations. Researchers initially believed they had uncovered nothing more than a natural limestone chamber. Then something moved beyond the light. At the far edge of the cave stood a tall, skeletal figure. For several seconds, no one moved. Its body was unnaturally thin, with elongated arms hanging beside a narrow torso. Pale, ash-colored skin stretched tightly across its frame, while faint bluish lines appeared beneath the surface. Then its eyes opened. A brilliant white flash suddenly reflected across the cave walls, briefly recalling the imagery of Daniel 10:6, where a mysterious heavenly figure is described with a face like lightning. But the light disappeared almost instantly. What remained were 2 dark, hollow-looking eyes fixed directly on the researchers. The figure did not attack. It simply began moving backward into a darker section of the exposed cave. That was what frightened them most. Its movement produced no footsteps. Loose stones beneath it remained undisturbed. Thermal cameras detected the researchers, the sun-warmed rocks, and even small animals hiding nearby. But the figure itself appeared completely black on the display. No measurable heat, no clear thermal signature, only an empty shape moving through the darkness. One researcher later claimed that as the figure disappeared behind the rocks, a sentence entered his mind without any audible voice. "The appointed time draws near." The words immediately reminded the team of biblical passages concerning beings restrained until an appointed moment. And suddenly, this second cave no longer felt like an unrelated discovery, because whatever had appeared there seemed to know that something elsewhere had already been opened. At the height of midday, when the sun stood bright above the Euphrates, the entire landscape suddenly darkened. There were no storm clouds moving in. No eclipse had been predicted. Yet an enormous black shadow spread across the valley, swallowing the sunlight within seconds and turning noon into an unnatural twilight. Then came the strangest detail. The darkness lasted exactly 7 minutes. Cameras, clocks, and eyewitness recordings all showed the same duration. During those 7 minutes, temperatures dropped sharply. Birds fell silent. Insects stopped buzzing. Even the wind seemed to disappear, leaving the valley trapped beneath a cold and unnatural stillness. Observatories reportedly found no ordinary celestial event capable of explaining what witnesses had seen. There was no known eclipse, no visible storm system, and no clear object that could account for a shadow of such scale. Then, as suddenly as it began, the darkness ended. The sun returned. Birdsong slowly resumed. Warmth returned to the air. But for those who had stood beneath that shadow, the Euphrates no longer felt like an ordinary river valley. Many immediately remembered the imagery of Matthew 24:29, where Jesus speaks of the sun being darkened and the powers of heaven being shaken. And that raised an even larger question. Was this only another unexplained phenomenon? Or had all the previous signs been leading towards something? Individually, each event could be questioned. Together, they began to resemble a sequence. That is why attention returned once again to Revelation 9, which speaks of 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates and restrained until an appointed hour, day, month, and year. For centuries, believers have debated whether those words should be understood symbolically or literally. But the question now felt different. If the chambers really represented confinement, if the restraints had been disturbed, and if the strange activity above and below the river was intensifying, then perhaps the most important question was no longer what had been discovered. It was whether something long restrained was beginning to move. What unsettled residents most was the acceleration. The signs were no longer separated by long periods of silence. They were arriving closer together, stronger, more difficult to dismiss, almost like a countdown. If you want to follow what happens next, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe as we continue uncovering the mystery surrounding the Euphrates and the prophecies connected to it. Thank you for watching.